I always thought the worst text message you could send to the wrong number was an embarrassing photo or a rant about your terrible boss, but I was wrong, so very terribly wrong. If you want to find out how one single clumsy tap on my phone completely flipped my world upside down and dragged a terrifyingly handsome alpha into my life, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below to let me know what you think of the story. Your support means everything to this channel. Now, let's get right into it. Part 1. The day had already chewed me up and spat me out, and it wasn't even 2 in the afternoon. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the accounting firm felt like they were piercing straight through my skull, illuminating the endless sea of gray cubicles. I sat hunched over my desk, my forehead resting heavily against the cool, fake wood surface, counting the agonizing seconds until the nausea decided to recede. Morning sickness. Whoever coined that term was an absolute liar who deserved to be locked in a room with a dozen queasy omegas. Because it didn't just happen in the morning. It was a relentless, all-day affair that hit me in ruthless waves. During morning commutes, right before important client calls, and especially when my coworker reheated his atrocious garlic pasta in the break room microwave. My body, which I used to have complete control over, had turned into an unpredictable traitor. All I could do was clutch my stomach and pray I wouldn't embarrass myself. I let out a long, shuddering sigh and dragged my phone closer to my face. The screen lit up, displaying a grainy black and white ultrasound photo. I had stared at this image so many times over the last 2 weeks that the pixels were burned into my memory. I could trace the faint outline of the tiny bean-shaped curve with my eyes closed. It was the undeniable proof that someone was growing inside of me. My chest twisted with a suffocating mixture of overwhelming dread and sudden, fierce tenderness. This baby had come at literally the worst possible time in human history. I was single, working a mind-numbing job that barely paid my rent, and dealing with a landlord who threatened eviction if I breathed too loudly. My social life had withered away into nothingness. My so-called friends had slowly drifted apart, leaving me with nothing but polite, awkward text messages on holidays. Except for Julian. Julian was my anchor, my best friend since college, and the only person who didn't look at me with pity. He was the one who still sent me ridiculous memes at 3 in the morning and bullied me into eating when I was too stressed to cook. A faint smile touched my lips as my thumb hovered over his contact name. Julian had been relentlessly begging me to send him the ultrasound photo. I have a right to see my honorary nephew or niece, he had demanded just yesterday, his voice loud and cheerful over the phone. I hadn't sent it yet. I think saying it out loud, sharing the photographic evidence, made it too real. But sitting here, drowning in spreadsheets and nausea, the loneliness was suffocating. Maybe sharing this tiny, terrifying miracle with him would make the weight on my shoulders feel a little lighter. So, between a sip of lukewarm ginger tea and a desperate attempt to ignore the garlic smell wafting from the kitchen, I tapped the screen. I attached the precious photo, typed a quick, "Here's the little troublemaker," and hit send. There. It was done. The proof of my impending, chaotic parenthood was sent to the one person in the world who wouldn't judge me. Or so I thought. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone vibrated against the desk. I picked it up, expecting a string of crying emojis or a caps lock message of excitement from Julian. Instead, my blood turned to absolute ice. Unknown number. Whose child is this? I blinked. I blinked again, rubbing my eyes, convinced that the sleep deprivation and pregnancy hormones were finally making me hallucinate. But the glowing white text on the dark screen didn't magically rearrange itself. The message was cold, blunt, and definitely not from Julian. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I frantically tapped the contact info at the top of the screen. My heart sank straight into my stomach. In my exhausted, brain-fogged state, I had transposed the last 2 digits of the phone number. It wasn't Julian. I had sent the most private, vulnerable image of my life to a complete and total stranger. "Oh my God," I muttered under my breath, pressing both palms against my burning face. "Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant, Leo. What's next? Are you going to accidentally email your bank details to a scammer? Maybe broadcast your shower, singing to the entire company." I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. My thumbs flew across the keyboard in a desperate frenzy. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. That was a wrong number. Please just delete the photo and forget this ever happened." I hit send, practically throwing the phone face down onto my desk. I took a deep, shaky breath. It was fine. This was fine. People get wrong number texts all the time. The stranger would probably roll their eyes, delete the picture of a stranger's uterus, and go about their day. End of story. Disaster averted. Except, the universe clearly hated me. My phone buzzed again. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I flipped the phone over. Unknown number, you have a child. I groaned silently, letting my head hit the desk with a soft thud. Why was this person interrogating me? Who replies to a frantic apology from a wrong number with a demanding statement. Me, it was a mistake. I am pregnant, yes, but I meant to send that to my best friend. Please just delete it. Have a good day. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. 10 seconds passed. 30 seconds. A full minute. No reply. The typing indicator didn't appear. A wave of profound relief washed over my tense muscles. Finally, they got the message. I opened my email client, forcing my eyes to focus on the numbers blurring together on my monitor, trying to pretend the last 5 minutes hadn't shaved 3 years off my life expectancy. And then a sharp, aggressive buzz shattered my concentration. Unknown number. Where are you? My head snapped up, my eyes widening in sheer terror. I looked around the office, half expecting to see some serial killer staring at me through the blinds. What the hell? I whispered. Who asks a stranger where they are? Was this a scam? A hacker? A stalker? My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, but a cold shiver slid down my spine. The bluntness of the words felt heavy, authoritative, and dangerous. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the device. I immediately blocked the number. Done. Over. I shoved the phone deep into my bag and refused to look at it for the rest of my shift. But the fear didn't leave. It settled in the pit of my stomach, wrapping around the tiny life growing inside me. Because 3 months ago, my life had taken a detour that I had desperately tried to bury in the deepest, darkest corners of my mind. I still remember the oppressive heat of that night. It was pouring rain, the kind of torrential downpour that soaked you to the bone in seconds. I had been dragged out to an upscale, neon-drenched nightclub by Julian, who insisted I needed to live a little before my youth expired behind a desk. The air inside the club had been suffocatingly thick, vibrating with the heavy bass of the music and the overwhelming mixture of expensive perfumes and sweat. I had only taken 3 sips of a bitter cocktail when it happened. A sudden, violent spike of fever had ripped through my body. My knees had buckled, my skin burning as if I had been set on fire. An unexpected heat cycle. It was early by 3 weeks. I had stumbled blindly through the crushing crowd, gasping for air, the sweet, cloying scent of my own distressed omega pheromones leaking into the air. I needed to get to the bathroom. I needed to lock myself in a stall and call an emergency medical service for suppressants. But I never made it. Before I could reach the safety of the corridor, a hand had clamped around my wrist. A grip like iron. I had looked up, my vision swimming with fever, and met eyes that were as dark and merciless as a midnight ocean. He was massive, his broad shoulders blocking out the strobe lights. And his scent, oh God, his scent. It was like a thunderstorm rolling over a pine forest. Raw, untamed, and crackling with electricity. An alpha in the precipice of his own rut. My instincts had screamed at me to run, but my biology had completely betrayed me. My body had melted into him, craving the very danger he represented. The memories after that were a fragmented, feverish blur. A dark, luxurious hotel room. Silk sheets. The tearing of fabric. A voice, low and gravelly, whispering ancient, possessive words against my neck that sent lightning straight to my core. The sheer, overwhelming power of an alpha who took what he wanted with no hesitation. When I woke up the next morning, my body aching and thoroughly marked, the bed was empty. He was gone. The only proof that he had ever existed was the heavy, expensive alpha scent lingering on my skin, and a sleek, black business card sitting on the nightstand. A card I had panicked, ripped into tiny pieces, and flushed down the toilet before I even read the name. I ran. I went back to my pathetic, normal life, convinced it was just a chaotic mistake born of biological bad luck. Until the morning sickness started. Now, sitting on the bus ride home, staring out at the rain-slicked streets, my blocked phone felt like a ticking time bomb in my bag. I was being paranoid. It was a random wrong number. A troll trying to scare me. There was absolutely no way the universe was cruel enough to connect those two events. The next morning, I dragged myself to the local prenatal clinic. The waiting room smelled faintly of sterile alcohol wipes and old magazines. I sat rigidly in a hard plastic chair, my hands folded protectively over my flat stomach. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept a wink, every shadow in my apartment looking like a threat. "Leo," the kind-faced beta nurse called out, holding a clipboard. "The doctor is ready for your checkup." I stood up, adjusting my oversized sweater, and followed her down the brightly lit hallway into examination room 3. She took my vitals, chatted cheerfully about the weather, and told me to wait on the examination table for the doctor. I hopped up onto the paper-covered table, the crinkling sound loud in the quiet room. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, calming breath. "Everything is fine. You are safe. You are just here to make sure the baby is healthy." The doorknob clicked. The door swung open. "Sorry for the wait, Leo. I just had to." The doctor's voice trailed off. I opened my eyes. But the doctor wasn't the one stepping into the room. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, impossibly tall, wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal gray three-piece suit that screamed wealth and power. His broad shoulders practically filled the doorframe. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his dark hair styled perfectly, but it was his eyes that pinned me to the table. Dark, piercing, and terrifyingly familiar. But it wasn't just his face. It was the scent. The air in the sterile little clinic room was suddenly choked with the heavy, dominating scent of pine and raw, crackling ozone. A thunderstorm. The very same scent that had haunted my nightmares and my most shameful dreams for the last 3 months. My heart completely stopped. My breath vanished from my lungs. Every single omega instinct in my body flared to life, screaming in a chaotic mix of absolute terror and desperate submission. He stepped fully into the room, the door clicking shut behind him with a sound of utter finality. He didn't look at the medical equipment. He didn't look at the terrified nurse peeking through the window in the door. His dark eyes locked onto me, slowly dragging down to rest deliberately on my stomach. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, rumbling vibration that sent a violent shiver straight down my spine. "You dare hide my pup from me?" End of part 1. Part 2. "You dare hide my pup from me?" The words didn't just hang in the air. They slammed into my chest with the force of a freight train. The sterile, white walls of the tiny clinic room seemed to shrink, closing in on me as the sheer, overwhelming pressure of his presence swallowed all the oxygen. My lungs forgot how to function. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird trying to break free. I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but my vocal cords refused to cooperate. Every single omega instinct buried deep within my DNA was screaming at me. Half of my brain was shrieking to drop to my knees and bare my neck in absolute submission to the suffocatingly powerful alpha standing before me. The other half was desperately calculating the distance to the door and wondering if I could slip past his massive, broad-shouldered frame before he caught me. Neither option seemed viable. He was blocking the only exit, his impeccably tailored charcoal suit completely out of place in the fluorescent-lit medical room. I don't know what you're talking about." I finally managed to stammer, my voice sounding disgustingly small and fragile. I pushed myself backward on the crinkly paper of the examination table, trying to put even an inch of distance between us. "You have the wrong room. You have the wrong person." His jaw clenched. The sharp, intoxicating scent of pine and dark, electric ozone flared, growing thicker, heavier. It wrapped around me like a physical weight. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. The soles of his expensive leather shoes made no sound on the linoleum floor, moving with the predatory grace of a wolf cornering its prey. "Do I?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated straight through my bones. "You transposed the last 2 digits of your friend's phone number. You sent the ultrasound of my heir to my private line. Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" My blood ran ice cold. He knew. Of course he knew. He was the unknown number. He was the man from the club. The shadow in the rain. The mistake I had spent 3 grueling, nauseating months trying to scrub from my memory. "You're insane," I breathed, my hands automatically flying to cover my stomach in a fiercely protective gesture. "This is my baby. Mine. You can't just barge into a medical facility and make psychotic claims." I'll scream. "I swear to God, I will call security." He didn't even blink at my threat. He stopped right at the edge of the examination table, towering over me. Up close, he was even more terrifyingly handsome than I remembered from that fever-hazed night. His eyes were dark, fathomless pools of obsidian, filled with an unyielding, territorial possessiveness that made my skin prickle with heat. "Scream," he challenged softly, leaning down just a fraction, his gaze dropping to my hands shielding my stomach. "Call them. Let them come. Let them try to stand between an alpha and his pregnant mate. See what happens. I am not your mate." I hissed, my face burning with a mixture of profound humiliation and rising panic. We slept together once. It was a biological accident, a heat-induced mistake. That doesn't give you ownership over my life or my body. Before he could respond, the doorknob rattled. We both snapped our heads toward the sound just as the door swung open. Dr. Evans, a kindly beta woman with silver-streaked hair and thick glasses, bustled into the room carrying a medical chart. She stopped dead in her tracks, blinking in surprise at the towering Alpha standing mere inches from me. The thick tension in the room was so palpable you could have cut it with a scalpel. "Oh, my apologies." Dr. Evans smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling behind her glasses. She completely misread the situation, taking in my flushed face and his hovering, protective stance. "I didn't realize Dad would be joining us today. It's always wonderful to see supportive partners at the first major ultrasound. I'm Dr. Evans." "He's not." I started, panic rising in my throat. "I am," he cut in smoothly. His voice shifted instantly. The dangerous, predatory growl was gone, replaced by a deep, polite, and undeniably authoritative tone. He didn't offer his hand to the doctor. He simply stood taller, asserting his dominance over the room without lifting a finger. I wouldn't miss the health assessment of my child. I gaped at him in absolute horror. The sheer audacity of this man. The absolute, unmitigated gall. "Wonderful," Dr. Evans beamed, completely oblivious to my internal screaming. She wheeled the small ultrasound machine closer to the table. "All right, Leo. Let's get you settled. I just need you to lift your sweater and lower your waistband a bit, so we can take a good look at your little one." I froze. I couldn't do this. I couldn't expose my stomach, expose my vulnerability, with this giant, terrifying stranger watching me like a hawk. I looked at the doctor, my eyes pleading for help. "Dr. Evans, maybe he should wait in the hall. It's a bit crowded in here." "Nonsense," the Alpha said before she could reply. He moved to the side of the table, standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his large body. "I am staying right here." Dr. Evans chuckled softly, oblivious to my terror. "It's perfectly fine, Leo. First-time fathers are always overprotective. Let's just focus on the baby, all right?" Defeated, humiliated, and trembling with a rage I couldn't safely express, I slowly pulled the hem of my oversized sweater up to my chest. The cool air hit my skin, raising goosebumps. I squeezed my eyes shut as Dr. Evans squirted a generous amount of cold, blue gel onto my lower abdomen. "All right, here we go," she murmured gently, pressing the smooth plastic probe against my skin. The machine hummed. I kept my eyes tightly closed, not wanting to look at the screen, and definitely not wanting to look at the man standing beside me. But I didn't need to open my eyes to know what he was doing. I could feel his heavy, burning stare fixed intently on the monitor. Suddenly, a rhythmic, rapid sound filled the small room. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. "There's the heartbeat," Dr. Evans announced, her voice filled with professional delight. "Strong and steady. Let's get a look at the little bean." Despite my fear, my eyes fluttered open. I turned my head toward the monitor. Through the grainy black and white static, the small, undeniable shape of a fetus became clear. My breath caught in my throat. Every time I heard that rapid heartbeat, my entire world shifted. It was real. This tiny, fragile life relying entirely on me. I couldn't help it. My eyes shifted from the screen to the Alpha. I expected him to look smug. I expected triumph. But what I saw completely threw me off balance. His usual icy, impenetrable composure had cracked. He was leaning forward, his large hands gripping the metal railing of the examination table, so hard his knuckles were stark white. His dark eyes were glued to the flickering screen, wide and filled with an emotion so raw, so violently tender, that it made my own chest ache. He wasn't looking at a concept. He was looking at his flesh and blood. The harsh lines of his jaw had softened. For a fleeting second, he didn't look like a terrifying predator. He looked like a man completely and utterly mesmerized. Then it happened. A sudden, strange fluttering sensation rippled beneath my skin. It was faint, like the wings of a butterfly brushing against my insides. I gasped softly. On the screen, the tiny gray blur shifted, a tiny limb stretching outward. "Oh, look at that," Dr. Evans laughed softly. "Very active today. We have a kicker." The baby had kicked. My baby had kicked for the very first time. Before my brain could even process the overwhelming flood of emotions, a massive, warm hand covered mine where it rested nervously beside my hip. I flinched, startled. But the Alpha didn't pull away. He moved his hand, deliberately and gently, until it was resting completely over my own hand, pressing it softly against the curve of my stomach where the baby had just moved. His skin was burning hot against mine. His scent completely enveloped me, not aggressive this time, but thick, warm, and suffocatingly protective. "He's moving," the alpha whispered, his voice incredibly hoarse, barely audible over the hum of the machine. He wasn't talking to the doctor. He wasn't even talking to me. He was speaking to the space between us, awestruck. Another tiny flutter pressed up against my skin, right beneath our layered hands. The alpha's breath hitched. His thumb moved, brushing a slow, unconscious circle against the back of my hand. The gesture was so incredibly intimate, so deeply familial, that it sent a jolt of pure panic straight into my core. No. No, no, no. I could not let this happen. I could not let him bulldoze his way into my life, strip away my independence, and play house just because of biology. He was a stranger. He was a dangerous, wealthy, powerful alpha who could crush my life with a snap of his fingers. I couldn't let my omega instincts, which were currently purring in absolute delight at his protective touch, win. I yanked my hand out from under his, as if I had been burned. I sat up so fast the paper beneath me tore violently. I grabbed a fistful of paper towels and wiped the blue gel off my stomach with frantic, uncoordinated movements, practically ripping my sweater back down. "That's enough," I choked out, my voice trembling with unshed tears and adrenaline. "I'm done. I want to leave." Dr. Evans blinked, startled by my sudden panic. "Leo, is everything all right? You're extremely pale. Have you been experiencing dizziness?" "I'm fine," I lied, sliding off the table. My knees felt like jelly. I have to go to work." "Thank you, doctor." I didn't wait for her to respond. I grabbed my worn-out canvas bag from the hook on the wall and practically sprinted out of the examination room. I speed-walked down the sterile corridor, my vision blurring slightly at the edges. I needed air. I needed to get away from the smell of pine and ozone before it completely suffocated my ability to think rationally. I burst through the double-glass doors of the clinic, gasping as the cool, damp city air hit my face. The sky was an overcast, miserable gray, threatening rain. Perfect. Exactly matching my life right now. I clutched my coat tightly around my body and started walking briskly toward the bus stop at the corner of the block. "Stop walking." The voice came from right behind me. Low. Commanding. Absolute. I ignored him, quickening my pace. My heart was thumping a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. "Just make it to the bus stop. Get on any bus. Disappear into the city." I said stop. A large hand clamped securely around my upper arm. The grip wasn't painful, but it was an immovable, unyielding force. It spun me around with effortless strength. I stumbled, my sneakers scraping against the wet concrete. I looked up, glaring fiercely into his dark, imposing face. "Let go of me. You have no right." "You are pale," he interrupted, his eyes sweeping over my face, taking in my trembling lips and the nervous sweat on my forehead. "Your heart rate is erratic. When was the last time you consumed an actual meal?" "None of your damn business." I snapped, trying to wrench my arm free. It was like trying to pull my arm out of a vice grip made of solid steel. "Let me go. I don't know who you think you are, but you don't own me. I am the father of the child you are carrying," he stated, his voice devoid of any hesitation. He stepped closer, backing me up until my shoulders hit the cold brick wall of a nearby building. He leaned in, trapping me between his massive body and the wall. "And my name is Alaric. You would do well to remember it, Leo." He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. He had probably run a full background check on me the second he saw the ultrasound picture. "I don't care if your name is the King of England," I hissed, leaning my head back against the brick, trying to maintain some semblance of defiance. But my body was betraying me. The lack of sleep, the lack of food, the intense emotional roller coaster, and the oppressive weight of his alpha aura were all crashing down on me at once. The gray sky above us suddenly seemed to spin. The edges of my vision darkened, closing in like a tunnel. A loud, high-pitched ringing sound started echoing in my ears, drowning out the traffic noise. "I'm leaving," I muttered, but the words slurred together. I pushed against his solid chest, intending to shove him away. Instead, my knees simply ceased to function. The world tilted violently on its axis. I felt myself falling, the hard concrete rushing up to meet me. But I never hit the ground. Two massive, incredibly strong arms wrapped around my waist and my shoulders, catching me effortlessly before I even registered the fall. I was pulled hard against a chest that felt like a brick wall, enveloped instantly in the scent of cedar, pine, and safety. "Leo." Alaric's voice cut through the ringing in my ears, suddenly sharp with alarm. I tried to speak, tried to tell him to put me down, but my tongue felt like lead. The darkness completely overtook my vision, and I let my head fall against his shoulder, slipping into the heavy, suffocating weight of unconsciousness. When I finally blinked my eyes open, the world was no longer spinning, but I was definitely not on a public sidewalk anymore. I was sitting in a plush, absurdly comfortable leather seat. The air smelled of expensive cologne and new car. Soft, classical music was playing from a top-tier sound system. I blinked blearily, trying to clear the fog from my brain. I was in the passenger seat of a sleek, black luxury SUV, and Alaric was sitting in the driver's seat, his large hands resting casually on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at a brick building. Panic instantly jolted me awake. I shot upright, immediately fumbling for the door handle. "What are you doing? Are you kidnapping me? Let me out." "Calm down," Alaric said smoothly, not even turning his head. He pressed a button on the console, and the unmistakable sound of the child safety locks engaging echoed through the car. Click. "Did you just lock me in?" I shrieked, batting uselessly at the door handle. "You are an actual psychopath. Open this door before I break the window." "You fainted on the street because you are malnourished and stressed," Alaric replied, his tone infuriatingly level and calm. He finally turned to look at me, his dark eyes sweeping critically over my pale face. "You will remain in this vehicle while I acquire what you need. If you attempt to break my window, I will simply restrain your hands. Am I understood?" I stared at him, my mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. "You can't do this. This is illegal. You are holding me against my will." Alaric didn't argue. He didn't even acknowledge my legal threat. He simply unbuckled his seatbelt, his massive frame shifting effortlessly in the confined space. "Do not move. I will be back in exactly 4 minutes." He opened his door, stepped out into the chilly air, and slammed the door shut, locking it from the outside with a beep from his key fob. I pressed my face against the tinted glass, watching him walk away. We were parked in front of a massive, high-end pharmacy. I watched in bewildered rage as the tall, terrifyingly handsome Alpha strode through the automatic sliding doors like he owned the entire building. I sank back into the leather seat, crossing my arms over my chest and glaring at the dashboard. This was a nightmare. A literal living nightmare. I was trapped in a luxury car by a wealthy Alpha who had decided my uterus was his personal property. True to his word, less than 5 minutes later, the automatic doors of the pharmacy slid open again. Alaric emerged, carrying 2 massive plastic shopping bags filled to the brim. He unlocked the car, opened the back door, and deposited the bags onto the rear seat. I twisted around to look, my eyes narrowing as I tried to decipher the contents. "What did you buy?" I demanded suspiciously as he slid back into the driver's seat. "Provisions," he stated simply, starting the engine with a low, powerful purr. I leaned over the center console, trying to peek into the bags. My jaw dropped. "Are you kidding me? Prenatal vitamins? 5 different brands of ginger tea. Crackers? And are those baby wipes? The baby is literally the size of a grape. What do you expect me to do? Wipe my stomach?" Alaric merged the heavy vehicle smoothly into the city traffic, his expression completely stoic. "Preparation is the foundation of security. You are severely lacking in basic supplies. I am correcting the oversight. I am not your oversight to correct." I yelled, throwing my hands up in the air. "Listen to me, Alaric, or whatever your name is. You cannot just swoop into my life like a wealthy, controlling superhero and buy me things. I have my own life. I have my own apartment. Take me to the nearest subway station right now." He ignored me. He actually literally ignored me. He turned the steering wheel, taking a sharp left turn that headed completely away from my neighborhood. "Did you hear me?" I demanded, unbuckling my seatbelt to glare at him from a closer distance. I said, "Stop the car." "Put your seatbelt back on, Leo," he commanded, his voice dropping an octave, slipping back into that dangerous, commanding alpha tone that made my spine tingle. "No. Stop the car." Alaric sighed, a sharp, irritated sound. He pulled the SUV over to the curb of a relatively quiet street and threw the gear into park. He unbuckled his own seatbelt and turned fully toward me. The space in the car instantly felt too small. "You are carrying my child," Alaric said, his words slow, deliberate, and heavy with absolute certainty. "You will not ride public transit where you could be jostled or exposed to illness. You will not eat processed trash that offers 0 nutritional value to my heir. You will not live in a rundown apartment building with inadequate security. From this moment forward, your well-being, and the well-being of the pup, is my sole responsibility. I stared at him, my breath hitching in my throat. The sheer, overwhelming dominance radiating from him was intoxicating, terrifying, and completely infuriating all at once. "You're crazy," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't even know you." "You will," Alaric replied softly. His large hand reached across the console. I flinched, expecting him to grab me, but his long fingers merely grasped the metal buckle of my seatbelt. He pulled it slowly across my chest, his knuckles brushing featherlight against my sweater. The brief contact sent a violent spark of electricity straight down to my toes. He clicked the seatbelt into place. His face was only inches from mine. I could see the faint stubble along his sharp jawline. I could feel the heat of his breath. I could smell the intoxicating, dark scent of pine and rain that made my Omega instincts scream in surrender. His dark eyes locked onto mine, holding my gaze captive. "You are mine now, Leo," Alaric whispered, the possessive words echoing the exact message he had sent me 3 months ago. "Stop fighting me, because I promise you, I never lose." Before I could formulate a sarcastic, biting reply to protect my rapidly crumbling walls, he turned back to the steering wheel, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb. I sat back against the leather seat, staring out the window at the blurring city streets, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was in so much trouble. End of Part 2. Part 3. The luxury SUV glided through the rain-slicked streets of the city with a terrifying, predatory silence. The heavy tint on the windows transformed the bustling, gray afternoon outside into a muted, distant movie that I was no longer a part of. I sat rigidly in the passenger seat, my fingers digging so hard into the soft leather of my canvas bag that my knuckles ached. Every logical instinct in my brain was screaming at me to unlock the door at the next red light, tuck and roll onto the wet pavement, and run for my life. But the sheer, imposing mass of the Alpha sitting right next to me made the idea of escape feel completely impossible. Alaric drove with one hand resting casually at the bottom of the steering wheel. He looked completely relaxed, as if he hadn't just essentially kidnapped a pregnant Omega from a public sidewalk. His dark, sharp eyes were fixed on the road, but I could feel the suffocating weight of his attention entirely focused on me. His scent, that dark, intoxicating blend of crushed pine needles, cedar wood, and the electric ozone of a thunderstorm, filled every cubic inch of the car's cabin. It wasn't aggressive or threatening anymore. Instead, it was a heavy, warm blanket of pure, concentrated protection. And I hated how much my traitorous body loved it. My Omega instincts, usually so quiet and suppressed by years of independent city living, were currently purring in deep, biological satisfaction. Alpha is here. Alpha is strong. Alpha will protect the pup. "Shut up," I muttered under my breath, completely unaware I had spoken out loud until Alaric's head turned slightly. "Did you say something, Leo?" he asked, his voice a low, smooth rumble that vibrated against the windows. "I was talking to my traitorous biology, not you." I snapped, crossing my arms defensively over my chest. "And you need to turn this car around. Right now. I have a shift at the printing shop in 2 hours. If I'm late again, my boss is going to fire me, and since you're currently holding me hostage, I won't be able to pay my incredibly overpriced rent." Alaric didn't even blink. He smoothly navigated the massive vehicle onto a private, tree-lined avenue that I recognized immediately. It was the absolute center of the financial district, a place where the skyscrapers were made of flawless glass, and the penthouses cost more than my entire bloodline would earn in a century. "You will not be returning to that damp, poorly ventilated basement you call a workplace," Alaric stated, his tone carrying the absolute, unquestionable authority of a man who is used to giving orders and having the world scramble to obey them. "The chemical fumes from the industrial toners are highly toxic. It is an unacceptable environment for my air." I gaped at him, my jaw practically unhinging. "Excuse me? Unacceptable? Do you know what's unacceptable? Kidnapping. You can't just dictate where I work. I need that job, Alaric. Normal people need money to survive." He completely ignored my outburst, turning the steering wheel sharply. The SUV descended into a cavernous, immaculately lit underground parking garage. The heavy iron gates slammed shut behind us with a resounding, echoing clang that sounded entirely too much like a prison door locking. "Money is no longer a concern for you," Alaric replied calmly, pulling into a private VIP parking bay that was larger than my entire apartment. He shifted the car into park and killed the engine. The sudden silence in the cabin was deafening. He turned his massive frame toward me, the leather seat creaking softly under his weight. "You are carrying my child." My blood. You will want for nothing. Your only responsibility from this moment forward is to rest, eat the nutrient-dense food I provide, and ensure the safe development of the pup. I stared at him, my heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. You are completely delusional. We slept together one time. You don't own me. I am not some fragile porcelain doll you can lock away in a tower just because I happen to be carrying your DNA. Alaric's jaw tightened. A microscopic flicker of irritation crossed his flawless features, and the scent of pine in the air sharpened, growing just a fraction colder. You fainted on a public street, Leo. Your stress levels are dangerously high, your caloric intake is severely deficient, and you are living in an unsecured building with a broken front door lock. You are incapable of properly protecting yourself and the child at this current stage. Therefore, I am stepping in. I have been taking care of myself for years. I practically shouted, my hands trembling as I fumbled blindly for the seatbelt release button. I am leaving. Open the doors. No. Alaric, open the damn doors before I call the police. He didn't move an inch. He just watched me struggle with the seatbelt, his dark eyes unreadable. You won't call the authorities. Because if you do, I will simply inform them that my pregnant mate is suffering from stress-induced hysteria, and as the child's alpha father, I am taking you home to rest. Who do you think they will believe? The exhausted, trembling Omega, or the billionaire Alpha who owns half the city's infrastructure? The cold, hard truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. The fight drained out of my muscles, leaving behind a hollow, terrifying realization. He was right. In a society that still fundamentally bowed to alpha dominance and wealth, a man like Alaric possessed unlimited power. I was nothing but a broke single Omega. If he wanted to keep me here, there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop him. Tears of pure, unadulterated frustration pricked the corners of my eyes. I hated crying. I hated feeling weak. I aggressively wiped at my eyes with the back of my sleeve, staring down at my lap, so he wouldn't see my tears. Why are you doing this? I whispered, my voice finally breaking. If you just want the baby, if this is just about an heir, you could just wait until he's born. You could hire a lawyer. You don't have to trap me like this. The heavy silence stretched between us for a long, agonizing moment. Then, I heard the rustle of fabric. The massive, warm weight of Alaric's hand settled gently over mine, where they were tightly clenched in my lap. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. His thumb slowly, methodically stroked the knuckles of my trembling hands, the repetitive motion sending a confusing, soothing warmth radiating up my arms. I am not trapping you, Leo, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a harsh, raw whisper that sounded entirely different from his usual commanding tone. I am securing you. There is a difference. Before I could ask him to explain whatever the hell that meant, he withdrew his hand, the sudden loss of his warmth leaving me shivering. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stepped out of the car, and walked around to my side. The passenger door swung open. The cool air of the underground garage washed over me. Get out, he commanded softly, holding his hand out to me. I looked at his massive, calloused hand, and then up at his dark, unyielding eyes. I knew if I took it, I was crossing a line. I was stepping into his world, his territory, and I might never be able to leave. But my legs were still shaking from the fainting spell, and the dull, persistent ache of morning sickness was beginning to claw its way back up my throat. Swallowing my pride, I ignored his hand and stubbornly swung my legs out of the car, intending to stand up on my own. My feet hit the concrete. My knees instantly buckled. Damn it, I cursed, bracing for the harsh impact. But just like on the street, Alaric was there. He didn't just catch me this time. He smoothly slid one massive arm under my knees and the other around my back, lifting me completely off the ground as if I weighed absolutely nothing. Put me down, I gasped, my face instantly burning with a fiery, mortifying blush. I weakly pushed against his solid, broad chest, but it was like pushing against a mountain of granite. I can walk. I just lost my balance for a second. You cannot even stand, let alone walk, Alaric replied, shifting my weight higher against his chest. He kicked the car door shut with his heavy leather shoe and turned toward a set of sleek, private glass elevators. Cease your struggling, Leo. You are wasting energy. I am a grown man, not a damn bridal bouquet. I hissed, burying my face in the lapel of his expensive suit because I was too embarrassed to look at the security cameras I knew were mounted on the concrete pillars. The fabric of his suit was impossibly soft, and the smell of him was so concentrated here, right against his chest, that it made my head spin. I could hear the slow, steady, powerful thumping of his heartbeat beneath my ear. It was infuriatingly calming. He carried me effortlessly into the glass elevator, pressing a biometric scanner on the panel with his thumb. The doors slid shut silently, and the elevator shot upward with a stomach-dropping speed. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, refusing to acknowledge the situation, until the soft ding announced our arrival. "Open your eyes, Leo. We are home." I cautiously peeled my eyes open and immediately stopped breathing. The elevator didn't open into a hallway. It opened directly into the most absurdly massive, ridiculously luxurious penthouse apartment I had ever seen in my entire life. The walls were made entirely of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking, unobstructed, 360-degree view of the city skyline, shrouded in the gray rain. The floors were dark, polished hardwood, covered in sprawling, plush rugs. Everything was styled in sleek, modern shades of charcoal, slate, and silver. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It smelled entirely of him. Alaric carried me past a massive living area, ignoring my continued, half-hearted protests, and strode down a wide hallway. He kicked open a heavy oak door and carried me into a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment building. He didn't drop me on the bed. He lowered me onto the center of the impossibly large, king-sized mattress with a gentleness that completely contradicted his massive, intimidating size. The mattress was so soft it practically swallowed me. "Stay here," he commanded, pulling a heavy, weighted duvet over my legs. "Do not move. I will bring you something to settle your stomach." "I don't need," I started, but the threatening churn in my stomach made me snap my mouth shut. The nausea was back, violent and sudden. I curled in on myself, pressing a hand to my mouth, squeezing my eyes closed. Alaric's scent instantly spiked with distress. The heavy pine aroma flooded the room, thick and desperate. I heard his heavy footsteps rapidly leave the room. I groaned, curling onto my side on the massive bed. This was a nightmare. I was trapped in a billionaire's glass cage, completely at the mercy of my own failing, pregnant body, and an alpha who thought he could solve everything with money and dominance. A few minutes later, Alaric returned. I heard the clinking of porcelain. "Sit up, Leo." Slowly. I cracked an eye open. He was standing beside the bed, holding a steaming mug and a small plate of dry, artisan crackers. The look on his face was one of intense, razor-sharp focus, as if handing me a cup of tea was a highly critical military operation. I painfully pushed myself up against the towering headboard, accepting the warm mug from his hands. The sharp, spicy scent of fresh ginger hit my nose, cutting through the nausea just a fraction. I took a tiny, hesitant sip. It was perfect. Not too hot, not too sweet. He stood there, towering over the bed, watching me take another sip. His dark eyes tracked the movement of my throat as I swallowed. "You can sit down, you know," I muttered, feeling incredibly self-conscious under his unblinking stare. Hovering over me like the Grim Reaper isn't exactly helping my anxiety. Alaric hesitated for a fraction of a second before lowering his massive frame onto the very edge of the mattress. The bed dipped heavily under his weight. He didn't look at me. He looked at my stomach, hidden beneath the thick duvet. "I have transferred the lease of your apartment to a holding company," Alaric said suddenly, his voice calm, as if he were discussing the weather. "Your belongings will be packed and moved here by a private security team tomorrow morning. The items that are deemed unsanitary or broken will be discarded and replaced." I choked on my tea. Scalding ginger burned the back of my throat, and I erupted into a fit of violent coughing. Alaric was instantly moving, a massive hand gently but firmly patting my back until the coughing subsided. "You did what?" I wheezed, my eyes watering, pushing his hand away. "Are you out of your absolute mind? You cannot cancel my lease. All of my stuff is in there. My clothes, my photos, my life." "Your life is here now," Alaric stated, utterly immovable. That apartment was a health hazard. The heating system was failing, and the neighborhood is highly populated by unbonded, aggressive alphas. I will not allow my mate to sleep in such vulnerable conditions. I froze. The mug in my hand trembled, spilling a drop of hot tea onto the duvet. "Don't call me that," I whispered, the panic rising hot and fast in my chest. "I am not your mate. A mate is someone you choose. Someone you love. We had one drunken, feverish night. You are just biologically obsessed with the baby. Don't confuse the two." Alaric slowly turned his head to look at me. The absolute, chilling intensity in his dark eyes made the breath stall in my lungs. "Do not insult my intelligence, Leo," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, velvety purr that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "And do not underestimate my instincts. An alpha does not mark a random stranger. An alpha does not leave his scent so deeply embedded in an omega's skin that it takes months to wash out. He leaned closer. The heavy, intoxicating scent of the thunderstorm completely enveloped me, practically drowning my senses. He reached out, his long fingers carefully brushing a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. The touch was agonizingly tender, completely at odds with the violent possessiveness in his eyes. "I knew what you were to me the second I tasted your skin in that club," he whispered, his thumb lightly tracing the line of my jaw. "I left my private number because I intended to claim you properly when your heat subsided. But you ran. You disappeared. My heart was beating so fast I was sure it was going to shatter my ribs." I couldn't look away from him. The raw, terrifying honesty in his voice completely dismantled every sarcastic defense mechanism I had built. I was terrified. I breathed, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. "You were huge. You smelled like danger. And I was just a nobody. I thought you were just using me for the rut." Alaric's jaw flexed. His thumb stopped moving against my jaw, his hand slipping down to firmly, but gently cup the back of my neck. He pulled me just a fraction closer, until I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "I do not share what is mine, and I do not discard what belongs to me," he swore, his voice a low, vibrating promise. "You ran from me once, Leo. I will not allow it to happen a second time. You are in my territory now. You are protected by my wealth, my name, and my teeth. No one will ever touch you. No one will ever look down on you. You will stay here, and you will let me take care of you and our child." Before I could process the overwhelming weight of his words, a sudden, sharp flutter erupted in my lower abdomen. I gasped, my hand instinctively flying to my stomach. Alaric's eyes immediately darted downward. Without asking for permission, his free hand moved, sliding over the duvet to rest directly over mine. Thump. A tiny, distinct kick pushed against the palm of my hand, right into Alaric's long fingers. The terrifying, imposing alpha completely froze. His breath hitched audibly. The dangerous, possessive darkness in his eyes completely shattered, replaced by a look of such profound, staggering awe that it made my own chest physically ache. "He knows," Alaric whispered, his voice incredibly thick, sounding almost broken. His large hand remained plastered over mine, refusing to let go. "The pup knows I am here." I stared at the massive, powerful man sitting on the edge of my bed, reduced to absolute wonder by a tiny flutter of movement. The walls of my stubborn independence were cracking, crumbling under the sheer weight of his pheromones, his relentless care, and the undeniable biological bond tying the three of us together. I was trapped in a golden cage, completely at his mercy. But as I looked down at his massive hand covering mine, protecting the tiny life growing inside me, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. Maybe, just maybe, I didn't want the door to open. End of Part 3. Part 4. When I finally opened my eyes again, the world was completely disorienting. For the last 3 years, waking up meant staring at a water-stained ceiling, listening to the relentless hum of a failing refrigerator, and shivering under a thin, scratchy blanket. But this morning, there was no hum. There were no sirens blaring from the street below. There was only a profound, insulated silence, broken only by the steady, rhythmic sound of my own breathing. I blinked against the soft, filtered light pouring in through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The storm from yesterday had passed, leaving behind a crisp, pale morning sky that stretched over the city skyline like a canvas. I was buried, literally swallowed, under a mountain of the heaviest, softest down comforters I had ever felt. The pillows were like clouds, and the sheets felt like spun silk against my skin. But it wasn't the luxury that made my heart stutter in my chest. It was the smell. The entire bed, the pillows, the heavy duvet, the very air in the room was completely saturated with the dark, intoxicating scent of pine needles, cedarwood, and the sharp, electric ozone of a thunderstorm. Alaric. His scent was everywhere, wrapped around me like a physical, suffocatingly warm embrace. The memory of yesterday crashed into me like a tidal wave. The clinic, the fainting, the kidnapping, or securing, as he had terrifyingly put it. The quiet, earth-shattering moment when his massive hand had covered mine to feel the baby kick for the first time. A fresh wave of panic, entirely different from the fear I had felt yesterday, flared in my chest. "I slept here," I whispered to the empty, cavernous room. I actually slept. I hadn't just dozed off. I had fallen into the deepest, most restorative sleep I had experienced in months. My omega instincts, usually on high alert in my sketchy neighborhood, had completely shut down the moment they registered they were surrounded by the scent of a powerful, capable alpha. My biology had recognized this penthouse as a safe nest, completely overriding my logical brain's screaming protests. I threw the heavy duvet off my legs, immediately missing the warmth, and swung my feet over the side of the impossibly high mattress. My toes sank into a plush, charcoal gray rug that probably cost more than my college tuition. I was still wearing the clothes from yesterday, my oversized, slightly faded sweater and maternity jeans. I felt gross, sticky with the remnants of clinic ultrasound gel and the cold sweat of my fainting spell. I needed a shower. More importantly, I needed to figure out how to escape this gilded cage before I completely lost my mind and my independence. I stood up, my joints popping in protest. My lower back ached, a constant dull throb that had become my new normal over the last few weeks. I placed a protective hand over my stomach, taking a slow, deep breath to steady myself. "All right, little guy," I muttered, my voice echoing slightly in the massive bedroom. "Let's go find the billionaire caveman and demand our freedom. Or at least our toothbrush." I padded softly out of the bedroom, pushing open the heavy oak door. The penthouse was even more intimidating in the daylight. The hallway led into a sprawling, open-concept living area that looked like a spread in an architectural digest. Minimalist, cold, and meticulously clean. There wasn't a single personal item in sight. No photos, no messy stacks of mail, no cozy clutter. It looked like a museum, not a home. But the kitchen was alive. The mouth-watering aroma of sizzling bacon, toasted bread, and rich, dark coffee drifted through the air, completely overpowering the lingering scent of expensive cleaning supplies. My stomach, which usually violently rejected the concept of food before noon, gave a loud, traitorous rumble of approval. I crept silently toward the massive marble kitchen island. Alaric was there. He was standing at a state-of-the-art, terrifyingly complicated stovetop, effortlessly flipping something in a polished steel pan. The charcoal suit jacket from yesterday was gone. He was wearing a crisp, stark white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his thick forearms, revealing the corded muscles and a heavy, expensive silver watch. His dark hair was slightly damp, falling messily across his forehead, completely ruining the unapproachable, icy billionaire facade. He looked devastatingly domestic, and it terrified me. I stopped at the edge of the kitchen, suddenly hyper-aware of how messy my hair must be, how wrinkled my clothes were, and how completely out of place I looked in this multi-million-dollar fortress. "You should not be walking barefoot on the hardwood, Leo. The ambient temperature drops near the glass." I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. He hadn't even turned around. He hadn't stopped moving the spatula. How the hell did he know I was there? "Do you have eyes in the back of your head?" I snapped, crossing my arms over my chest in a desperate attempt to build a physical barrier between us. "Or are you secretly a bat?" Alaric smoothly turned off the burner. He finally turned to face me, his dark eyes sweeping over my disheveled appearance. A faint, almost imperceptible softening occurred around the harsh corners of his mouth. "I could hear your heartbeat the moment you woke up," he replied, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that sent a completely involuntary shiver down my spine. "And I could smell the shift in your pheromones. You are anxious. And hungry." "I am kidnapped," I corrected him sharply, refusing to let him dictate my emotions. "And I want to go home. You can't just keep me here." Alaric ignored my protest entirely. He picked up a pristine white porcelain plate, loaded it with fluffy scrambled eggs, perfectly crispy bacon, and a side of sliced avocados and berries. He set it down on the marble island, followed by a tall glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. "Sit," he commanded, pulling out a tall leather bar stool. "I'm not a dog, Alaric. Stop giving me one-word orders." "Leo," he said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying that heavy, undeniable alpha weight that made my knees feel dangerously weak. "You have not consumed a proper, nutrient-dense meal in days. Your body is working overtime to sustain the pup. You will sit down, and you will eat, or I will personally feed you myself. The choice is yours." I stared at him, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I wanted to throw the plate at his perfectly styled head. I wanted to storm out of the front door. But the smell of the food was agonizingly good, and the sudden, sharp kick against my lower abdomen reminded me that I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. Grumbling a string of highly inappropriate curses under my breath, I marched over to the island and practically climbed onto the bar stool. I grabbed a silver fork and aggressively stabbed a piece of egg. Happy, I spat out around a mouthful of food. It was infuriatingly the best thing I had ever tasted. Alaric didn't answer. He simply poured himself a cup of black coffee, leaning his tall, broad frame against the counter opposite me. He watched me eat with an intensity that made my skin prickle. It wasn't a predatory stare. It was the heavy, assessing gaze of a guardian ensuring his charge was secure. "Where are my things?" I asked after I had practically inhaled half the plate, the food settling surprisingly well in my usually rebellious stomach. "You said you were having my apartment packed up." "A security team was dispatched at 6 a.m., Alaric replied, taking a slow sip of his coffee. His eyes never left my face. "They have transported the items deemed safe and hygienic. The rest was disposed of." I dropped my fork. It clattered loudly against the porcelain plate. "Disposed of? You threw away my things? Who gave you the right to decide what is hygienic in my life?" The mattress was infested with dust mites and provided zero lumbar support for a pregnant Omega, Alaric listed off, his tone completely unbothered by my rising fury. The clothing was primarily composed of cheap, synthetic fibers that restrict blood flow and irritate sensitive skin. The kitchenware was chipped and retained chemical residue. I will not allow my mate or my child to be surrounded by garbage. It was my garbage. I yelled, my voice cracking with a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. It wasn't about the cheap clothes or the terrible mattress. It was about control. It was about the utter erasure of the life I had built with my own two hands, however pathetic it might have seemed to a billionaire. "You can't just erase my life, Alaric. You can't just buy me out of my own existence. I am a person, not a pet you acquired at an auction." I scrambled off the bar stool, my chest heaving, tears of absolute frustration blurring my vision. I didn't care that he was huge. I didn't care that he was a terrifying alpha. I walked right up to him and shoved my hands hard against his solid chest. He didn't move an inch. It was like pushing against a brick wall. "Let me go," I choked out, my voice breaking completely. "Just let me leave. Please." Alaric's expression changed. The icy, unbothered billionaire vanished. In a fraction of a second, his arms came up, wrapping securely around my waist, pulling me flush against his body. "Let go of me," I sobbed, struggling weakly against his hold, but my energy was already draining. "No," he whispered fiercely, pressing my head down against his shoulder. His large hand came up to cradle the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my messy hair. "I will never let you go, Leo. Scream at me. Hit me. Hate me if you must. But you will stay here, where I can see you, where I know you are breathing, where I know you are safe." The sheer, raw desperation in his voice completely short-circuited my brain. This wasn't the arrogant posturing of a man used to getting his way. This was the terrifyingly vulnerable confession of a man who was completely, biologically consumed by an instinct he couldn't control. The heavy scent of the thunderstorm flared around us, but it wasn't intimidating. It was soothing. It was a thick, protective blanket of pheromones designed entirely to calm a distressed Omega. And heaven help me, it worked. My struggling ceased. My hands, which had been balled into fists against his chest, slowly uncurled, my fingers gripping the crisp fabric of his white shirt like a lifeline. I buried my face into his neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of pine and cedar, letting the warmth of his massive body seep into my shivering frame. I was so tired. I was so incredibly tired of fighting the world alone. For 3 months, I had carried the terrifying weight of this pregnancy in absolute solitude, terrified of the future, terrified of failing. But standing here, wrapped in the arms of a man who was practically radiating absolute security, a treacherous, deeply buried part of my soul whispered, "Let him carry it. Let him take the weight." We stood there in the middle of the spotless, million-dollar kitchen for what felt like hours. He didn't say a word. He just held me, his thumb drawing slow, rhythmic circles against the nape of my neck, his chin resting on the top of my head. The baby, perhaps sensing the massive influx of calming alpha pheromones, settled down into a quiet, heavy stillness in my belly. Slowly, the embarrassing realization of what I was doing dawned on me. I was clinging to my kidnapper like a koala bear. I sniffled, my face burning with fresh humiliation, and pushed gently against his chest. Okay, I'm done having a mental breakdown now." Alaric loosened his grip, but he didn't step back. He kept his hands resting lightly on my hips, his dark eyes searching my flushed, tear-stained face with intense scrutiny. He reached up, his thumb gently wiping away a stray tear from my cheek. "You are exhausted," he murmured, his voice incredibly soft. "I have had a wardrobe prepared for you. Go to the master suite. Bathe. Put on clean clothes. I will have a doctor sent up to administer a vitamin 4. I wanted to argue about the doctor. I wanted to argue about the wardrobe. but looking into his unyielding eyes, I knew I didn't have the energy for round two. Fine, I muttered, taking a step back, instantly missing his warmth. But I'm not taking in four unless I read the label first. A faint, breathtakingly handsome smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. As you wish, little fighter. I spun around, ignoring the nickname that made my stomach do a complicated flip, and marched back down the wide hallway toward the master bedroom. When I opened the door to the massive walk-in closet attached to the ensuite bathroom, I actually gasped out loud. Alaric hadn't just bought me a few replacement shirts. He had entirely stocked half of the room-sized closet. Rows upon rows of pristine hangers held the softest, most luxurious clothing I had ever laid eyes on. Cashmere sweaters in soft neutrals, silk pajama sets, tailored maternity trousers that looked incredibly comfortable, and rows of pristine brand-new shoes. I reached out, running my hand over a thick, cream-colored cardigan. It was so soft it felt like petting a cloud. There were no price tags. Everything had been carefully unboxed and hung with absolute precision. He was out of his mind. He was completely, unequivocally insane. And yet, as I pulled out a set of soft, dark gray sweatpants and an oversized, incredibly thick t-shirt, I couldn't stop the treacherous warmth blooming in my chest. No one had ever taken care of me like this. No one had ever looked at my frayed, exhausted life and decided to fix every single broken piece without even being asked. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life in a bathroom that looked like a five-star spa, utilizing shampoos that smelled like expensive rain and mint. When I finally stepped out, drying my hair with a towel the size of a blanket, I felt like a completely different person. The dull ache in my back had faded, and the nausea was completely gone, replaced by a strange, buoyant energy. I dressed in the ridiculously soft clothes, noting with a blush that the t-shirt smelled faintly of cedar. Had he rubbed his scent on the clothes before hanging them? The thought was overwhelmingly possessive and entirely too intimate. When I walked back out into the living room, the penthouse was quiet. The kitchen had been meticulously cleaned. Alaric was sitting on a massive, slate-gray sectional couch, a sleek silver laptop resting on his knees. He was typing rapidly, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up the second I entered the room. His hands stopped moving on the keyboard. His dark eyes slowly dragged up my body, taking in the damp hair, the flushed skin, and the oversized clothes swallowing my frame. The air in the room instantly thickened. The scent of pine spiked, growing heavier, darker, laced with a sudden, sharp current of pure alpha approval. He closed the laptop with a quiet click and set it on the glass coffee table. "Come here." I hesitated, my bare feet sinking into the plush rug. "Why?" "Because you belong on this couch, resting, not hovering in the doorway like a frightened rabbit," he replied, patting the empty space beside him. I scowled at the rabbit comment, but slowly made my way over, sitting on the opposite end of the massive sectional, pulling my knees up to my chest. "I'm not frightened. I'm plotting my revenge." Alaric huffed a quiet, genuine laugh. It was a deep, rich sound that did terrifying things to my pulse. He shifted on the couch, closing the distance between us in a single, fluid movement. Before I could protest, he reached out, grabbed my ankles, and pulled my legs straight across his lap. "Hey!" I yelped, trying to pull my legs back, but his large hands clamped firmly over my calves, holding me in place. "Revenge requires stamina," he said smoothly, his thumbs beginning to press deeply into the tight, aching muscles of my calves. "Which you do not have." I opened my mouth to deliver a scathing remark, but his thumbs hit a knot of tension in my leg, and I let out an embarrassingly loud, pathetic groan instead. "Oh my God," I mumbled, letting my head fall back against the cushions. That is illegal. You have illegal hands." Alaric chuckled again, the sound vibrating through my legs. "Pregnancy places immense strain on the lower extremities. Your circulation is compromised. Relax, Leo. Let me take care of it." I closed my eyes, entirely incapable of fighting him when his hands were doing absolute magic to my sore muscles. He worked in complete silence for a long time, his strong fingers kneading away the tension of the last 3 months. The penthouse was quiet, the only sound the faint patter of new rain against the massive glass windows. It felt entirely too intimate. It felt like a trap I was willingly walking into. "Why me?" I asked quietly, the question slipping out before my brain could filter it. I opened my eyes, looking at his handsome, focused face. "You're a billionaire, Alaric. You could have any Omega in the city. You could have a perfect, willing mate who knows how to navigate this world. I'm a broke accountant who prints flyers for a living and eats cereal for dinner. I yelled at you in a hospital. Why are you trying so hard to keep me? Alaric's hands stopped moving. He didn't look up at me immediately. He stared at my legs resting across his lap for a long, heavy moment. When he finally lifted his gaze, the intensity in his dark eyes was paralyzing. Perfection is an illusion, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a low, rough whisper. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who smile politely, agree with everything I say, and want nothing but my name and my bank accounts. They are empty. They smell like calculated ambition. He slowly moved one hand from my calf, trailing his fingers lightly up my leg until his palm rested warmly over my kneecap. But you, he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips before locking back onto my eyes. In that club, before the heat overtook you, you looked at me and you glared. You didn't care about my suit. You didn't care about my aura. You just wanted me to move out of your way. And when the heat hit, your scent. Alaric took a sharp, unsteady breath, the memory clearly affecting him. Your scent was the most honest, pure thing I had ever experienced. It wasn't perfume. It was absolute, raw need. You didn't want my money, Leo. You just wanted me. The alpha beneath the suit. My breath caught in my throat. My face burned furiously, remembering the shameful, overwhelming desperation of that night. I was out of my mind with fever. It was just biology. Biology does not lie, Alaric countered fiercely. He leaned forward, closing the space between us until his face was only inches from mine. You can lie to yourself with your words, Leo. You can tell me you hate me. You can tell me you want to leave. But your scent tells a different story. Your pulse tells a different story. He moved his hand higher, sliding it up my thigh, completely bypassing my attempts to squirm away, until his massive palm settled firmly, possessively over the curve of my stomach. And he, Alaric whispered, his eyes dropping to where his hand rested against the soft fabric of my shirt. He tells the truth. Right on cue, as if summoned by his father's deep voice, a firm, undeniable kick struck directly against the center of Alaric's palm. Alaric's breath hitched again, that look of completely unguarded wonder washing over his harsh features. He didn't pull back. He pressed his hand closer, as if trying to absorb the tiny impact straight into his soul. I am not keeping you because you are carrying my air, Leo, Alaric said, looking back up into my eyes. The truth in his gaze was absolute, terrifying, and beautiful. I am keeping you because you are the only thing in my life that has ever felt real. I couldn't speak. The air had been completely stolen from my lungs. Every argument, every sarcastic defense, every wall I had built around my heart shattered into dust under the sheer, unyielding force of his honesty. I looked at this terrifying, powerful man who was currently practically worshipping my swollen stomach, and I realized with a sudden, overwhelming clarity that I was completely, hopelessly doomed. I didn't want to run anymore. I wanted to stay right here, in this storm, and see where the lightning struck. I slowly, hesitantly lifted my hand, trembling slightly, and placed it over his large hand resting on my stomach. Alaric's eyes widened a fraction. He looked at our layered hands, and then up at me, a silent question burning in the darkness of his gaze. I didn't say a word. I just swallowed hard, holding his gaze, and didn't pull my hand away. For the first time since this chaotic nightmare began, the corners of Alaric's mouth curved into a full, genuine, breathtakingly beautiful smile. The Alpha had claimed his territory, and finally, the Omega had stopped fighting the siege. End of Part 4. Part 5. The morning sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse felt different today. It wasn't the harsh, blinding glare of a prison, but rather a warm, golden illumination that seemed to breathe life into the sprawling, slate-gray room. I woke up slowly, my cheek pressed against the ridiculously high thread-count pillowcase. For the first time in what felt like a grueling, endless century, my first waking thought wasn't a panicked calculation of my bank account balance or a wave of crippling nausea. Instead, my brain registered a heavy, intoxicating warmth wrapping around my entire body, anchoring me to the mattress. I didn't open my eyes immediately. I just lay there, perfectly still, absorbing the sensory details of my golden cage. A massive, incredibly heavy arm was draped securely over my waist. The weight of it was substantial, an immovable force of nature that practically pinned me to the bed. A broad chest, radiating heat like a furnace, was pressed flush against my back. I could feel the slow, deep, even rhythm of breathing ghosting over the nape of my neck, sending a continuous cascade of electric shivers down my spine. And the scent. God, the scent. The air was absolutely saturated with the dark, rich aroma of a pine forest caught in the middle of a crackling thunderstorm. It had seeped into my skin, into my hair, into my very bloodstream. My Omega instincts, which had spent years locked away in a tiny defensive box, were currently unfurled and purring in absolute biological euphoria. Alpha is holding us. Alpha is protecting the nest. We are safe. I swallowed hard, my eyes fluttering open. The sheer magnitude of my surrender last night crashed over me. I hadn't pushed him away. I hadn't fought. When he had placed his hand over my stomach and confessed that I was the only real thing in his life, I had yielded. I had let him in. I slowly shifted, trying to roll over to face him without waking him. But the second my muscles tensed, the massive arm around my waist tightened instantly. The grip was possessive, a reflexive, unconscious reaction from a predator ensuring its prize hadn't slipped away in the night. "Do not move," a voice rumbled directly against my ear. It was thick, gravelly with sleep, and so impossibly deep it vibrated straight through my ribs. My breath hitched. "I was just trying to turn around, you giant caveman. I wasn't trying to rappel down the side of the building." Alaric let out a low, rough sound that might have been a chuckle. His arm shifted, not releasing me, but guiding my body as I rolled over to face him. Up close, the Billionaire CEO looked devastatingly human. His usually immaculate, swept-back dark hair was completely disheveled, falling across his forehead in unruly waves. The sharp, intimidating lines of his jaw were softened by the heavy shadows of morning stubble. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, were half open and filled with a hazy, liquid heat as they focused entirely on my face. He didn't look like the man who owned half the city. He looked like a man who was utterly, hopelessly addicted to the person in his arms. He lifted his free hand, his long, calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from my eyes. The touch was agonizingly tender. "How do you feel?" he murmured, his thumb trailing down the side of my cheek. "Any nausea? Any pain?" "No," I whispered, finding it incredibly difficult to speak when his face was inches from mine. "I feel fine. Actually, I feel better than I have in months." Alaric's gaze dropped from my eyes, tracking slowly down my chest to where the thick duvet covered my swollen abdomen. He slid his hand down, resting his palm flat against my stomach. The baby, who was usually a chaotic gymnast in the mornings, simply pressed a tiny, gentle flutter against the inside of my skin, as if happily acknowledging his father's touch. "He is growing stronger," Alaric said, his voice laced with a profound, terrifying reverence. He looked back up at me, the hazy sleepiness in his eyes completely vanishing, replaced by that sharp, absolute certainty. "And you are glowing. The shadows under your eyes are fading. This is where you belong, Leo. With me." I didn't argue. I didn't throw out a sarcastic defense mechanism. I just looked at him, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs, and realized that he was absolutely right. The peace of the morning, however, was violently shattered a few hours later. I was sitting on the massive kitchen island, eating a bowl of fresh fruit that Alaric had practically demanded I consume, when he walked out of his private home office. He was back in his armor, a bespoke, midnight blue three-piece suit that fit his massive frame with terrifying perfection. His hair was slicked back, his jaw was tense, and the heavy scent of ozone crackled in the air. He was in full alpha mode. "I have meetings that require my physical presence until 4 o'clock this afternoon," Alaric announced, striding into the kitchen. He stopped in front of me, his hands resting on the edge of the marble island, completely trapping me between his arms. "The security team is stationed outside the front doors and at the private elevator access. You are not to leave this floor under any circumstances." I wasn't planning on running a marathon. I muttered around a strawberry, feeling a sudden, completely irrational pang of disappointment that he was leaving. "Good," he said smoothly. He reached up, his knuckles brushing against my jaw. "Because tonight, you will need your energy. We are attending a gathering." I froze. The strawberry suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. "A gathering? What kind of gathering?" Alaric's eyes darkened, a flash of territorial dominance sweeping across his features. "The annual winter gala of my pack hierarchy. Every major family, business associate, and high-ranking alpha within our financial sector will be in attendance." My stomach plummeted straight to the floor. "No, absolutely not. Nope. Not a chance in hell, Alaric." I practically scrambled backward on the marble counter, shaking my head frantically. "Are you insane? You want to drag me, a broke, pregnant, nobody Omega who doesn't know a salad fork from a soup spoon, into a room full of bloodthirsty billionaire alphas and judgmental socialites? They will eat me alive." "No one will touch you," Alaric snarled, the sudden ferocity in his voice making me flinch. The scent of pine turned sharp and aggressive, filling the kitchen with an overwhelming, suffocating pressure. You are mine. You carry my air. You outrank every single miserable soul in that ballroom, Leo. They don't know that. I yelled, my hands flying to my stomach in a protective panic. They don't know me. They'll look at me and see an opportunistic trap. They'll whisper, Alaric. They'll stare. I can't handle that kind of stress right now. Please, just leave me here. Alaric's expression softened instantly. The aggressive aura vanished, replaced by a deep, anchoring warmth. He stepped into my space, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me to the very edge of the counter, so my knees bracketed his hips. They will whisper, he admitted, his voice dropping to a low, soothing vibration. He leaned his forehead against mine, forcing me to look directly into his dark, unyielding eyes. They will stare, but they will do it while bowing their heads to you. Because tonight, I am not just taking you to a gala, Leo. I am officially, publicly claiming you before the entire hierarchy. I am ending the rumors before they begin. When we walk out of those doors tonight, the entire world will know that you belong to me, and that this pup is my blood. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't just bringing me as a date. He was declaring me as his mate. He was putting a permanent, invisible shield around me, using his own terrifying reputation. I don't have anything to wear, I whispered, my voice completely broken, the last weak defense of a man who was already surrendering. A slow, devastatingly arrogant smirk spread across Alaric's face. I have already taken care of it. The tailors will arrive at noon. Rest, little fighter. Tonight, we rewrite your entire world. Before I could process the magnitude of his words, he leaned in and pressed a firm, branding kiss to the corner of my mouth. It wasn't a sweet kiss. It was a promise. A declaration of absolute ownership. And then he was gone, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone in the sprawling penthouse with a heart that felt like it was going to explode. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was staring at a stranger in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the master bedroom. The tailors Alaric had sent were not ordinary seamstresses. They were quiet, terrifyingly efficient professionals who had measured, pinned, and altered a masterpiece directly onto my body. I was wearing a tailored suit, but it wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The fabric was a deep, shimmering charcoal gray that seemed to absorb the light. It was spun from some impossibly soft material that draped perfectly over my frame. The trousers were expertly crafted with a hidden, elasticized silk band that supported the heavy curve of my pregnant stomach without digging into my skin. Instead of a stiff button-down shirt, I wore a high-necked, midnight black silk blouse that hugged my chest and completely hid my collarbones. A very deliberate choice to hide the lack of an actual mating bite on my neck. The jacket was cut sharply, accentuating my shoulders while flowing elegantly over my hips. I looked expensive. I looked untouchable. You look breathtaking. I gasped, spinning around. I hadn't even heard the bedroom door open. Alaric was standing in the doorway. He had changed into a formal tuxedo that was entirely black, black shirt, black tie, black jacket. He looked like the Grim Reaper wrapped in billion-dollar fabric. But his eyes were completely entirely consumed by a raw, feral hunger. He didn't walk toward me, he stalked. Every step was deliberate, predatory, and filled with a heavy, suffocating dominance. The air in the room instantly thickened with the scent of the thunderstorm, so potent and concentrated it made my knees physically wobble. He stopped inches from me, his massive hands reaching out to grip my hips with a bruising, desperate strength. He didn't look at the mirror. He only looked at me, his gaze dropping to the curve of my stomach hidden beneath the expensive fabric, and then snapping back up to my face. Mine, he growled softly, the word vibrating deep in his chest. It wasn't a romantic whisper. It was an absolute, biological fact. I'm terrified, I admitted, my hands trembling as I reached up to grip the lapels of his dark jacket. I needed to hold on to something solid before the panic completely overwhelmed me. Alaric, I don't know how to act around these people. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I embarrass you? Alaric's hands slid from my hips around to the small of my back, pulling me flush against his solid chest. You do not need to act, Leo. You do not need to speak to them if you do not wish it. You only need to stand by my side, hold your head high, and remember that my blood runs in the veins of the child you carry. You are untouchable. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear, sending a violent shiver down my spine. And if anyone dares to make you feel otherwise, I will tear this city down to its foundations. There was no exaggeration in his tone. He meant every single word. The drive to the gala was a blur of neon city lights and the heavy, intoxicating scent of Alaric's pheromones in the confined space of the luxury car. My stomach was churning with a chaotic mix of morning sickness and pure, unadulterated anxiety. I kept my hand pressed firmly against my abdomen, drawing tiny circles with my thumb, trying to soothe the baby who was kicking relentlessly against my ribs. When the car finally slowed to a halt, we were parked in front of a sprawling, historical mansion on the outskirts of the city. The entire estate was bathed in golden light, surrounded by manicured gardens and an army of valets and security personnel. The heavy car door was pulled open from the outside. The roar of conversation, classical music, and the overwhelming, suffocating scent of hundreds of different alphas and omegas hit me like a physical wall. I recoiled instantly, my breath catching in my throat. It was too much. It was a sensory overload that made my omega instincts scream in distress. But before the panic could fully set in, a massive, warm hand completely enveloped mine. Alaric stepped out of the car, pulling me gently but firmly out behind him. He didn't offer me his arm. He didn't walk beside me. He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, pulling me flush against his side, practically shielding my body with his own. His heavy, dark pine scent flared violently, completely overpowering the foreign scents in the air, creating a protective bubble around us that allowed me to breathe. "Keep your eyes on me," Alaric commanded softly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Ignore the rest." We walked up the grand marble staircase and stepped into the ballroom. The sheer opulence of the room was staggering. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant light over hundreds of people dressed in diamonds and bespoke suits. The moment Alaric crossed the threshold, a subtle, rippling change swept through the massive room. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The music seemed to fade into the background as a heavy, collective silence fell over the nearest crowd, spreading outward like a wave. They weren't looking at Alaric. They were looking at me. Or more specifically, they were looking at the incredibly obvious, undeniable curve of my pregnant stomach and the possessive, territorial grip the most powerful alpha in the city had around my waist. The whispers started almost immediately. Like the buzzing of 1,000 angry hornets, the gossip hissed through the crowd. "Who is he? Look at his stomach. Is that?" I heard rumors, but I didn't think he would actually claim a nobody. "Did you hear how they met? A complete trap. He must have sent that ultrasound on purpose." My face burned with a fiery, consuming humiliation. I wanted to sink into the beautiful marble floor and disappear. I tried to pull away from Alaric, to shrink back, to hide, but his arm was an iron band around my waist, refusing to yield an inch. "Do not lower your head, Leo," Alaric murmured, his voice a dangerous, velvet threat. "You are my mate. Look at them." He guided us deliberately through the center of the room. People scrambled to step out of his way, parting like the Red Sea before his overwhelming, dominant aura. Every step felt like a march to an execution. We didn't get far before our path was blocked. A tall, broad-shouldered alpha with striking blonde hair and a deeply arrogant smirk stepped directly into our path. He held a crystal glass of champagne, swirling it lazily as his pale blue eyes raked over my body with blatant, unapologetic disgust. "Alaric," the man drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "I must say, I am surprised. When the pack elders heard the rumors that you had fallen for a street-level trap, we thought it was a joke. Yet here you are, parading the consequence for all to see." The entire ballroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The tension in the air spiked so violently it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. I stopped breathing. The man was Silas Thorne, heir to a rival logistics empire, and a man known for his ruthless cruelty. He was looking at my stomach as if I were carrying a disease. I instinctually took a step back, my hand flying to shield my bump, a terrified whine threatening to tear from my throat. That tiny, frightened movement was all it took. Alaric snapped. The air in the ballroom didn't just grow heavy, it completely solidified. A terrifying, crushing wave of pure, unadulterated alpha dominance exploded from Alaric's body. It was a physical force, dark, violent, and suffocating. Several omegas in the immediate vicinity actually gasped, dropping to their knees under the sheer weight of his pheromones. Even the alphas staggered, their faces paling as their instincts screamed at them to submit to an apex predator. Silas's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. His crystal glass slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering violently against the marble floor. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Alaric didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He took one single, terrifyingly slow step forward, completely shielding my body behind his massive frame. Silas. Alaric's voice was a deep, guttural growl that sounded like stones grinding together. It was the voice of a monster, devoid of any humanity. You have exactly 3 seconds to lower your eyes from my mate before I gauge them out of your skull and feed them to you. Silas swallowed hard, his face completely devoid of color. He tried to maintain his ground, his pride fighting a losing battle against his biological terror. Alaric, it was merely an observation on the purity of the pack line. He has no pedigree. You cannot seriously. He carries my blood. Alaric roared, the sudden explosion of volume making the crystal chandeliers above us vibrate. The sound was absolutely terrifying. It wasn't just anger, it was raw, territorial fury. Alaric reached back, his massive hand gripping my waist, pulling me firmly against his side, forcing me to stand beside him, not behind him. He looked out over the terrified, silent crowd of billionaires, pack elders, and socialites, his dark eyes burning with absolute, uncompromising power. Hear me, and hear me well. Alaric's voice carried through the massive hall, a decree etched in stone and fire. This is Leo. He is my chosen mate. He is the mother of my heir. He outranks every single one of you standing in this room. He turned his blazing eyes back to Silas, who was currently trembling violently, the smell of his fear completely polluting the air. Touch him, Alaric promised, the words slow and dripping with a lethal, icy calm. Disrespect him. Whisper his name in a tone I do not like. Look at him with anything less than absolute reverence, and I swear on my bloodline, I will eradicate yours. I will strip you of your wealth, your name, and your life. Is that entirely clear, Silas? Silas couldn't speak. He just nodded frantically, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror, and practically scrambled backward, disappearing into the crowd like a frightened rat. The entire ballroom remained completely paralyzed in shock. No one moved. No one dared to even breathe loudly. Alaric slowly turned his head to look at me. The terrifying, monstrous aura instantly evaporated, replaced by a gaze so incredibly soft, so violently tender, that it completely shattered the last remaining wall around my heart. He didn't care about the hundreds of people watching. He didn't care about the pack politics or the billionaires. Alaric lifted his large hand, gently cupping the side of my face. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone, wiping away a tear I didn't even realize had fallen. "You are safe," he whispered, entirely for me. "You are mine." And right there, in the center of the most powerful people in the city, Alaric leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle, polite kiss. It was deep, consuming, and fiercely protective. It was a brand burned into my soul, a public declaration that could never be undone. My hands trembled as I reached up, my fingers tangling in the lapels of his black tuxedo, and for the first time, in front of the entire world, I kissed my alpha back. I was no longer the broke, terrified pregnant Omega running from a mistake. I was the mate of a king, and standing in his arms, feeling the baby kick happily against our pressed bodies, I finally realized that I was exactly where I was always meant to be. End of Part 5. Part 6. The silence in the back of the luxury SUV on the way home from the gala was entirely different from the heavy, terrifying quiet of our first ride together. This silence was thick with an exhausting, euphoric kind of peace. The adrenaline that had spiked my heart rate to dangerous levels during Alaric's terrifying public declaration was finally crashing, leaving me boneless and drained. I was slumped completely against his solid side, my head resting heavily on his broad shoulder, my eyes slipping shut as the neon lights of the city blurred past the tinted windows. Alaric hadn't let go of me since we left the ballroom. His arm was wrapped securely around my waist, keeping me anchored flush against his chest, while his other hand gently stroked the curve of my stomach through the tailored fabric of my suit. His scent, the deep, intoxicating blend of pine and post-storm ozone, was wrapped around me like an impenetrable fortress, keeping the chaotic, lingering sense of the gala entirely at bay. "You are exhausted," Alaric murmured, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that transferred directly into my skin. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the crown of my head. "I think I left my soul on that marble floor," I mumbled sleepily, not bothering to open my eyes. "If you ever make me do that again, I am filing for a divorce." Alaric's chest rumbled with a quiet, genuine chuckle. The sound was so incredibly rare, so intimately reserved just for me, that it sent a warm flutter straight through my heart. "We are not married yet, Leo. You cannot divorce me." "Details," I sighed, shifting closer, entirely giving up on the last shreds of my stubborn independence. "I'll find a loophole." or I'll just steal all your cashmere sweaters and run away to a cabin. I would simply buy the cabin, the forest around it, and lock the door from the inside, he replied without missing a beat, his hand flattening possessively over the baby, who was currently asleep. You are never escaping me, little fighter. The entire world knows you are mine now. There is nowhere you could go where my name would not protect you. I swallowed hard, the overwhelming magnitude of what had happened tonight finally settling deep into my bones. He had stood in front of the most powerful, ruthless people in the city and threatened to burn their empires to the ground if they even looked at me wrong. He had taken my fractured, lonely life and completely enveloped it in his terrifying, unyielding devotion. Alaric, I whispered, my voice incredibly soft in the quiet car. Yes, my Leo? Thank you. I felt his breath hitch slightly. His arm tightened around me, pulling me impossibly closer until there was absolutely no space left between us. He didn't say you're welcome. He didn't offer a grandiose billionaire speech. He just pressed his face into my neck, right over my scent gland, inhaling deeply, and held me as if I were the only fragile, precious thing left in the universe. The next 3 months passed in a bizarre, beautiful blur of domestic bliss that I never could have anticipated. The terrifying, ruthless CEO of the city's largest financial empire had completely transformed into a hovering, overprotective shadow. As my pregnancy progressed into the final, agonizingly heavy stages, Alaric's alpha instincts kicked into a hyper-vigilant overdrive that was both incredibly endearing and completely infuriating. He relocated his entire executive office to the penthouse. He refused to attend in-person board meetings, opting instead to terrifyingly glare at his executives through a massive video conference screen in the living room while simultaneously massaging my swollen ankles. My body had become incredibly cumbersome. The baby was growing rapidly, strong and healthy, but the physical toll on my omega frame was exhausting. My lower back ached constantly, my center of gravity was entirely ruined, and my emotions were a chaotic roller coaster of hormonal surges. But the most overwhelming change was the nesting instinct. It hit me in the middle of the 8th month with the force of a hurricane. One afternoon, while Alaric was locked in a tense virtual negotiation regarding a corporate merger, a sudden, primal panic had seized my chest. The bed felt wrong. The couch felt wrong. The entire multi-million-dollar penthouse felt entirely unequipped for the arrival of my pup. I needed safety. I needed warmth. Most importantly, I needed him. When Alaric finally emerged from his office 2 hours later, rolling his shoulders to release the tension of the meeting, he stopped dead in his tracks in the hallway. I was sitting in the very center of the massive walk-in closet. I had dragged the thickest, plushest duvet from the master bed onto the floor, creating a circular barrier. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was what I had used to line the inside of the nest. I had completely raided his side of the wardrobe. Dozens of his bespoke, thousands of dollars suits, incredibly expensive silk ties, cashmere coats, and freshly laundered dress shirts were piled around me in a chaotic, heavily scented mound. I was wearing one of his oversized black t-shirts, buried up to my chest in his clothing, violently glaring at the doorway like a feral cat protecting its territory. Alaric stared at the mountain of ruined, wrinkled couture. He looked at me, sitting perfectly in the center of it, clutching a gray cashmere sweater to my chest. I bared my teeth slightly, a completely involuntary, biological warning slipping out of my throat. My nest. My alpha's scent. Do not touch. I expected him to be furious. I expected the icy billionaire to demand I get off his ruined wardrobe. Instead, a look of profound, staggering awe washed over Alaric's harsh features. His pupils blew wide, completely swallowing the dark irises, his alpha instincts violently reacting to the sight of his pregnant mate building a nest out of his scent. The heavy, intoxicating aroma of pine and ozone flooded the closet, so thick and concentrated I could practically taste it. He didn't yell. He dropped to his knees at the edge of the nest, completely uncaring about the expensive slacks of his suit, and slowly reached his hand out, palm up, asking for permission to enter my space. "Leo," he rasped, his voice incredibly rough, completely wrecked by the sight of me. "Is it soft enough? Do you need more? I will give you everything I own." The feral, protective panic in my chest instantly dissolved, melting into a puddle of absolute, devastating affection. I dropped the sweater, reaching out to grab his massive hand, and practically dragged him into the pile of clothes with me. "You smell good," I mumbled, burying my face into the crook of his neck as he carefully wrapped his arms around my completely unrecognizable waist. "Don't take them to the dry cleaners. They smell like you. The baby needs it." Alaric crushed me to his chest, burying his face in my hair. They are yours. Everything I have is yours. Sleep, my beautiful Omega. I will guard the nest. And he did. He sat on the floor of the closet for 4 hours while I slept curled against his side, actively answering highly classified financial emails on his phone with one hand, while his other hand remained firmly planted over my stomach. I thought we had more time. The doctors had given us another 2 weeks. But babies, especially those with dominant alpha genetics, rarely follow schedules. It happened at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. A sudden, violently sharp pain ripped across my lower abdomen, entirely different from the dull aches I had grown accustomed to. It was a searing, consuming pressure that stole the breath straight from my lungs. My eyes snapped open in the darkness of the master bedroom, my hands flying to grip the sheets. Before I could even formulate a thought, before I could even gasp his name, the bedside lamp clicked on. Alaric was instantly awake, hovering over me, his face pale and taut with absolute terror. He had felt the massive spike of distress pheromones in the air before my brain had even registered the pain. "Leo?" he demanded, his hands immediately skimming over my body, checking for the source of the distress. "What is it? What is wrong?" "It hurts," I gasped, my voice a high, tight wheeze as a second contraction slammed into my spine. I curled inward, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the pain. "Alaric, it's time." The baby. The controlled, methodical billionaire vanished, replaced entirely by a frantic, desperate alpha whose mate was in pain. "Breathe," Alaric commanded, though his own voice was shaking. He didn't waste a single second. He practically vaulted off the bed, throwing on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt. He grabbed a pre-packed hospital bag from the corner of the room, threw it over his shoulder, and returned to my side in less than 10 seconds. He didn't ask if I could walk. He carefully, gently slid his arms under my back and my knees, lifting me from the bed as if I weighed nothing at all. "Hold on to me," he whispered fiercely, pressing his cheek against my forehead as he carried me out of the bedroom. "You are safe. I have you. We are going right now." The next hour was an absolute blur of pain, panic, and the terrifying efficiency of Alaric's wealth. He didn't call an ambulance. He called his private security team. The luxury SUV was waiting at the private garage entrance the second the elevator doors opened. Alaric sat in the back with me, refusing to let me go, letting me practically crush the bones in his hand every time a contraction hit. He murmured a constant, unbroken stream of reassurances against my ear, flooding the back of the car with his calming pine scent, trying desperately to soothe my erratic Omega instincts. We bypassed the public emergency room entirely. Alaric's vehicle pulled into the private, secured underground entrance of the city's most prestigious hospital, a hospital where he sat on the board of directors. A team of doctors and nurses was already waiting for us. They rushed me into a sprawling, private delivery suite that looked more like a luxury hotel room than a medical facility. The pain was becoming unbearable. It was a consuming, fiery pressure that blocked out the entire world, leaving only the agonizing rhythm of the contractions. I was terrified. I was completely overwhelmed, thrashing weakly against the sterile sheets. "I can't," I sobbed, tears blurring my vision as another wave hit, tearing a ragged scream from my throat. "Alaric, I can't do this. It hurts too much." "You can. You are the strongest person I have ever known." Alaric was entirely ignoring the medical staff. He pushed past a frantic nurse and positioned himself right by my head. He wasn't wearing a sterile gown. He didn't care. He leaned over me, framing my sweat-slicked face with his massive hands, forcing me to look directly into his dark, burning eyes. "Look at me, Leo. Only at me," he commanded, his voice a heavy, grounding anchor in the storm of my agony. "Do not look at the monitors. Do not look at the doctors. I am right here. I am not leaving you. Breathe my scent. Take my strength." He leaned down, pressing his scent gland directly against my nose and mouth. The heavy, crackling aroma of the thunderstorm flooded my senses. It was pure, unadulterated alpha dominance, but it wasn't aggressive. It was a biological lifeline. It hit my frantic Omega instincts like a sedative, cutting through the edge of the panic, centering my shattered focus entirely on him. "That's it, my brave Leo," he whispered, his own voice cracking with unshed tears, completely undone by my pain. "Push for me. Give me our pup. I am right here." I gripped the collar of his t-shirt, pulling him down until our foreheads were pressed together. I anchored myself entirely in his dark eyes, in the fierce, uncompromising devotion shining within them, and I pushed with every single ounce of strength left in my exhausted body. The delivery room was a chaos of shouted medical instructions, the rapid beeping of monitors, and my own ragged, breathless cries. But all I knew, all I felt, was Alaric. His hands, his scent, his voice repeating my name like a prayer. One more Leo. One more big push. Dr. Evans shouted over the noise. I screamed, squeezing my eyes shut, completely burying my face into Alaric's neck, and gave it absolutely everything I had. And then, the agonizing pressure vanished. A heavy, sudden silence fell over the room for a fraction of a second, followed immediately by a sharp, furious, beautiful wail. My chest heaved. I collapsed back against the pillows, my entire body trembling violently, completely devoid of energy. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't open my eyes. Leo, Alaric gasped. I forced my heavy eyelids open. Alaric was staring down at the foot of the bed. The terrifying, ruthless, emotionally impenetrable billionaire was completely, openly sobbing. Tears were streaming down his harsh, handsome face, completely unchecked, his broad shoulders shaking with the sheer, staggering magnitude of the moment. You did it, he choked out, turning his tear-filled eyes back to me, pressing frantic, desperate kisses all over my forehead, my cheeks, my lips. You did it, my perfect, beautiful mate. He is here. Our son is here. A nurse stepped forward, carrying a tiny, squirming bundle wrapped in a soft white blanket. She didn't hand him to Alaric. She laid the baby directly onto my bare, sweat-slicked chest. I gasped, my trembling hands coming up to cradle the tiny weight. He was incredibly small, his face flushed and angry from the trauma of birth. He had a shocking amount of dark, thick hair, exactly like his father's. But as I gently wiped a tear from my own eye, the baby suddenly stopped crying. He wriggled against my chest, his tiny nose twitching as he inhaled the scent of my skin. He knew me. He knew the heartbeat he had listened to for 9 months. I looked up at Alaric, who was hovering over us, completely paralyzed by awe. He looked terrified to even breathe too heavily, as if he might break the fragile perfection of the moment. Touch him, Alaric, I whispered, my voice completely exhausted but overflowing with a profound, earth-shattering love. He's yours. Meet your son. Alaric's hand trembled as he reached out. He didn't touch the baby's face. He simply offered his massive index finger. The newborn blinked, his tiny, unfocused eyes opening for the first time. And with an instinct that defied logic, a tiny, impossibly small hand reached out and clamped tightly around Alaric's massive finger. Alaric let out a broken, shattered breath, dropping his head down until his forehead rested gently against my shoulder, his tears soaking into my hospital gown. My family, he wept, completely surrendering his soul to the tiny infant and the exhausted Omega holding him. My entire world. 3 days later, we brought him home. The penthouse didn't feel like a cold, glass museum anymore. It felt like a sanctuary. The air was warm, filled with the soft, sweet, milky scent of a newborn pup, entirely blending with the heavy, protective cedar and pine of his alpha father. It was late evening. The city below was a sprawling blanket of glittering gold and white lights, but I didn't care about the view. I was sitting on the massive sectional couch in the living room, a soft blanket draped over my shoulders. Alaric was sitting right beside me, our thighs pressed together, completely mesmerized by the sleeping infant cradled in the crook of his massive, muscular arm. We had named him Julian, after the best friend who had inadvertently started this entire chaotic journey. Alaric looked completely ridiculous, sitting in a pair of casual sweatpants, a multi-billion-dollar empire completely ignored on his silenced phone, entirely captivated by the tiny breaths puffing from Julian's parted lips. He looked softer, younger, completely unburdened by the shadows of his past. He has your nose, I murmured, leaning my head against Alaric's shoulder, utterly content. He has your absolute stubbornness, Alaric countered quietly, keeping his voice to a low whisper so as not to wake the sleeping pup. He refused to eat until the temperature of the formula was exactly 98.6 degrees. He is a tyrant. He's an alpha. I smiled, tracing a light pattern against the fabric of Alaric's shirt. He gets his tyrannical tendencies directly from his father. Alaric turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The terrifying intensity was still there, the absolute, possessive dominance of an alpha, but it was entirely tempered by a profound, endless devotion. Leo, he whispered, carefully shifting his weight so he could wrap his free arm around my shoulders, pulling me firmly against his side. Do you ever think about it? Think about what? The text message, Alaric said softly, his thumb gently stroking the soft curve of Julian's cheek. The wrong number. What would have happened if you had checked the contact name before hitting send? What if you had never sent me that picture? I looked down at our beautiful, perfect son sleeping soundly in his father's arms. I thought about the crushing loneliness of my old apartment, the terrifying fear of facing the world alone, and the sheer, overwhelming love that currently filled every single corner of my shattered, rebuilt heart. I reached out, resting my hand securely over Alaric's heart, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm beating beneath my palm. "It wasn't a wrong number, Alaric," I whispered, leaning up to press a soft, lingering kiss against his jaw. My mind was foggy, but my instincts knew exactly what they were doing. They were just finding a way to bring me home. Alaric closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against mine, a deep, rumbling purr of absolute contentment vibrating in his chest. Surrounded by his scent, holding our future between us, I closed my eyes and let the silence of the penthouse wrap around us. Not a gilded cage, but the perfect, unbreakable sanctuary of our own making. End of story.